Hi everyone, this is Aga Skoczypiec. I'm the host of TravelZoom, a podcast that explores places beyond the surface. As part of Hong Kong episodes, today on the show I'll be talking to Pete Spurrier. Pete is an author and a publisher. He's been living in Hong Kong since the early 90s, and he's very well known for his series of 3 guidebooks to Hong Kong. That's the Serious Hiker's Guide, the Leisurely Hiker's Guide, and the Heritage Guide. When I first moved here 6 years ago, Pete's guides provided countless inspiration for many of my weekends, and they still actually do. And when I started working on Hong Kong episode, I thought he would be just a perfect guest to come on and share his insights and stories about this unique city. So Pete, welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting me. Very nice to be here, and thank you for that very generous introduction. I will try to live up to this reputation you give me.
Oh, I'm sure you will. So Pete, I'd like to start by asking you, how would you describe Hong Kong in a few sentences to someone who might not be familiar with the place?
I think it's a place of surprises. It's a place that people don't expect. I think when people first hear about it from overseas, they just expect tall buildings, stock market, busy streets. But when you come here, you find it's a lot more than that. There's mountains, there's islands, there are bays and rivers beyond the city, and it's a place which you can spend not just your whole holiday exploring, but actually months and years if you decide to live here.
So Pete, you've been living in a place for quite a while, and I would love to hear your perspective about how Hong Kong has changed and evolved over the past 27 years.
Okay, when I came here, it was 1993. That was 4 years before the handover, and there was a lovely energy in the air actually, because people knew one era was ending and another one was due to start, and there was a sort of crackle in the air. No one knew what the future would hold. When I look back at that time now, I remember thinking in 1993 that 1997 was so far away, and what a shame I wouldn't still be here to see it, because I only thought I would be here for a few months. I came here just by accident after a trip across Asia. Hong Kong was a very good place to find work, to find, to settle down for a while, find a job, make some money to carry on travelling. I thought I would do that for 2 weeks, then maybe 2 more weeks. Oh, then a month. Then this is a lot of fun. Then 2 more months. Oh, then I've met so many interesting people. I'll stay another month. So I never thought I would be here to see the actual handover. And now here we are in 2021. I'm still here, but I don't regret that at all.
Okay, yeah, that's actually fascinating. So you really didn't intend to stay longer than a few weeks?
Not at all. But I got sucked into Hong Kong quite quickly. You know, I must say my first impression, I didn't think I would enjoy it because, you know, Hong Kong, it's crowded, it's busy, it's humid. When I arrived, it was in September. I didn't know it, but a typhoon was coming in. So you had that feeling in the air of air pressure, you know, making your clothes stick to your skin. There was almost like steam was rising from the harbour. It was so hot. So I thought, well, this is not a very comfortable place. I won't stay very long. But then I got jobs, and I started socialising with the people I was working with, and it was a great place. And I thought, well, this is pretty cool. There are people here not just from Hong Kong, but from around the world as well, from Asia and from Europe. And it taught me that Hong Kong is a real meeting place where you can meet people from everywhere. And I think it's always been that way. It's not a new thing. Hong Kong has been a meeting place for cultures for at least 200 years. And for me, it was just a lucky accident to discover it.
And September, we must say, is not the hottest month, right? So it already felt uncomfortable.
But it's hot enough, isn't it?
So, but you're saying the city already felt very busy and bustling when you came 27 years ago. Certainly it did to me when I came 6 years ago, but I thought maybe it would have been a bit different earlier on.
Well, I guess it's busier now. There's a higher population now. But even then, it's always been a crowded place, hasn't it? It's always had some of the most crowded districts in the world by human density. And my first 2 years were spent living in Tsim Sha Tsui at the tip of Kowloon, because that's where I arrived. I got the train down from the border in China, got off the train in Tsim Sha Tsui. So I ended up living there for 2 years. And you can't really live in a place which is more noisy, crowded, dense, 24 hours, stuff happening. It was great. And I was working in bars and restaurants to start off with, so that was great as well. It was a party every night, you know. But after a while, I realised that this was a bit too crowded, too hot, too claustrophobic in some ways. because even in the middle of the night in Chim Sa Choy, the shops are all open, the bars are all open, people are in the streets, lights are on. So this is how I started hiking. Just on my day off, I used to get 1 day off a week, working in a bar. And all my mates working in the bar on their day off, they would just go out to other bars. And I did that for a while. And then I thought, no, I want to discover more of Hong Kong. I didn't know where to start, but Nathan Road runs down the middle of Kowloon. So I just got on a bus there, going north. I thought, I'll just see where it goes. So I went to the terminus, and that ended in some housing estate in North Kowloon somewhere. No idea where I was. But next to the bus station, there was a minibus station with green minibuses. And they were going somewhere, so I just jumped on one. And that went to a village somewhere in a valley. And I got off, and then I just started walking into the hills. And instantly I found, a bit of a weight of the city was lifted off my shoulders. I felt more airflow, more calmness. And I just went walking into the hills. I didn't have a map with me because I didn't plan that for that day. And then, of course, I got lost. And then, it got dark, and I came down into a different valley with a different village. But there was a minibus there as well, and I got on that. And then eventually I found my way back to TST. It was a great adventure. And I went back to work in the bar on the Monday or whenever it was, and said to everyone, what did you do at the weekend? They said, we went to this great bar, Happy Hour, or we watched TV. I said, I went to some village in the mountains, and I got lost, and then there was a waterfall, and then there was a river, and then, but that got me hooked on exploring Hong Kong. So from that point onwards, every day off I would just go to a different part of the New Territories or a different island, and then sometimes take a map, sometimes not, just get lost. And getting lost is the best way of discovering new places, I found. And that gave me a habit which I've kept up until today.
So you're still a serious hiker?
Yeah, every week I go somewhere. And I've been lucky enough to write about hiking as well. That didn't happen obviously to start off with, but years later I started to write guidebooks about Hong Kong, and then magazine articles and columns. And I still write a magazine column every month now about hiking. And I've been doing that since 2006. So I've got to find a different place to hike every month, which you would think would be difficult, because you look at the map of Hong Kong, it looks quite small, right? Mm-hmm. But actually it's not. It's very complicated. It's all hills and valleys and forests. So it's very dense. There's a lot hidden in it. So to my surprise, I'm able to make a new route, find new routes of hiking almost every month.
Really?
After all this
incredible.
time.
Because honestly, I think, first of all, I do think that if people know anything about Hong Kong, they probably will be familiar with the urban side and verticality.
Yeah.
I don't think many people are aware that 40% of Hong Kong's territory is actually country parks and national parks.
That's right.
And then even those that know that there are some hiking trails, I think not until you actually go to the deep New Territories hikes, you realize the geography of the place. Because I think, many people think that it's probably just Kowloon, and honestly, not till I got to these hikes over there where I realized there are just hundreds and hundreds of kilometers of those hikes. I think combined you wrote about 4 different trails, and combined that's about 350 kilometers. But what you're saying is there is a lot more than that.
There's plenty more, yeah. Actually, to research those books, I walked those long distance trails. But then I went on side trails as well, always looking for new routes. I think I walked about 500 miles just to research the first book, but it was a pleasure. I do that on my day off anyway, so it was a pleasure. But yeah, the geography of Hong Kong is just a mountain range which is basically submerged in sea. So when the British came and decided to build a city here, there was no flat land. They had to make it by reclaiming it. So you'll find that every piece of land which has tall buildings on it is new, and that's why the land is so expensive, because it's all been created by human effort. Before the city was built, it was just mountains, and when you go out to the older villages now, they are in the mountains. That's the only place they could build them, and because it's mountainous, a lot of that land hasn't been built on. That's why you're able to keep 40% of the land as country park, because it's uplands, it's steep hillsides, it's hidden deep valleys, which is difficult to build on, at least in the past. So we're lucky that in a way that the early colonialists couldn't build on these hillside lands, so we've still got them today.
Yeah, definitely. This is definitely great. And I wanted to actually go back to the urban parts a little bit. You said that when you arrived, the place was already very multicultural, and that's been so for a while. Can you perhaps talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I didn't know when I arrived, because actually when I arrived in Hong Kong, I knew nothing about it. I came here. I actually ran out of money in northwest China on my way along the Silk Road from Europe through the Middle East to Central Asia to here. I got to a place called Urumqi in northwest China and ran out of money. And there I met an Australian woman who said, "Oh, you're looking for work, aren't you? Why don't you go to Hong Kong? You know, it's British at the time, so you won't need a work visa. You can get a job." Oh, so I came here, hitchhiked here, got here, and she was absolutely right. I got 3 job offers on my first day. It was really booming then, but I didn't know anything about it. The only image in my mind that I had of Hong Kong was martial arts, Bruce Lee films, plastic toys. When I was growing up in England in the 1970s, if you turned over any toy car, it said "Made in Hong Kong" on the bottom. That was all I knew. So when I came here, it was great to learn about it. Actually, I started teaching English here as one of my first jobs to adults as conversation classes. And that was a great choice, because all I did every day was talk to them about their everyday lives, to find out what they did at the weekend, where do they go on holiday, what do you cook, what do Hong Kongers think about this, what do you think about that. So that taught me about Hong Kong. So I started to learn about it just by chatting to people. And then I found out that, you know, the British have been here for 200 years or so. But Hong Kong is not just a place where the native Chinese met the colonial British. When the British arrived, the Portuguese were here already, because they'd been in Macau for 200 years prior to that. The Arabs had been trading by ship up the Pearl River estuary to Guangzhou prior to this. When the British came, that was followed on by people from South Asia, today's India and Pakistan. People came from there as part of the army or as business people. And so you'll find that a lot of Indian and Pakistani families have been in Hong Kong since then, for sometimes 6 or 7 generations, which is actually longer than many Hong Kong people, because a lot of Hong Kong people, their parents or grandparents came here from China in the 1950s or 1960s. So there's a lot of complexity to Hong Kong's multicultural makeup that you don't know when you first arrive.
Interesting. So let's talk a little bit about the heritage preservation. When I look at the picture of Hong Kong from mid-20th century or so, it looks quite different, and obviously it looks different, but my impression is that not that much has been preserved. You wrote the entire book about heritage and what's left of it in Hong Kong, so can you perhaps talk a little bit about how much there is?
Yeah, unfortunately, there's not very much built heritage left. And the reason for that is just what we were talking about earlier. All the land here that's been built on is mostly reclamation. And so there's a limited amount of it. When you want to build something new, you've got to either reclaim more land or demolish what's standing on the land already. So when you look back at photos of Hong Kong from the 1800s, it almost looks like Venice or something. It looks like some grand European city with, you know, stone architecture, colonnaded buildings, 3-story mansions, you know, on the waterfront. And wouldn't it be lovely if that was still here today? Because in many cities, even in Asia, you can still see that kind of architecture. But in Hong Kong, there's just so much of a limit on land that whenever you want a new building, you've got to knock the previous one down. So I don't think it's not because. So I think what you find now is that a lot of young people in Hong Kong are quite interested in heritage, which is great. And I think that's partly because they realise so little of built heritage is left. So what is left now probably will be preserved because there's so little of it. It's got a greater cultural value. But when you look back at those photos of old Hong Kong, it's sometimes very sad, because you would love to walk down those streets, walk into the old General Post Office or the old Prince's Building, which was a 3-story colonnaded marble, confection. It looks wonderful, but in places like Penang and Malacca, elsewhere in Asia, even Macau, a lot of that is still standing because the land is less valuable. There's less pressure on the land. In Hong Kong, we're crammed into this little piece of flat land between mountains, on two sides of a harbour, and that land is so valuable, people just have to build on it.
Yeah, fascinating. I must tell you that, well, you wrote the entire book about heritage and what's left of it, and through your power of storytelling, in fact, even though not that much is left, going through those streets and imagining a place through your words, how it was in the past, is actually pretty fascinating and enjoyable anyway. So, based on what's left, what would you recommend for anyone to visit?
Well, so if anyone's interested in heritage, then the New Territories is probably the place to go, because that was less developed. The city started off on Hong Kong Island and Kowloon, so there's always been more building and demolition and more reclamation and more demolition there. But the New Territories was developed a bit later. So if you go a bit north of Kowloon, you can find walled villages, you can find ancestral halls, all these things which date back to the Qing dynasty in most cases. Because of these structures were built by these clan villagers, they've usually preserved them quite well. That's not true everywhere in the New Territories. There is a lot of sprawl of village houses in places where there's flat land, but in among those you can find places which have been declared as monuments by the government. So these ancestral halls, these study halls, walled villages, and that can be a nice place to visit. So you can do a nice day just roaming around the New Territories, maybe start in Tai Po. There's a railway museum of the old railway that used to go to Canton, pictures of old Hong Kong there, the New Territories. You can then take a bus up to Kadori Farm on the way to Cam Tin, and then down into Cam Tin there's walled villages with gate towers, because in the old days there were bandits, there were pirates in the New Territories. People arranged their houses in a grid format with a wall around them for safety, and you can still see that. You can do a round trip, then come back to Kowloon in the evening. If you're looking for an itinerary on a short trip to Hong Kong, I'd recommend the New Territories for at least one day, doing a round trip from Kowloon, and finishing off in the markets of North Kowloon, the busy street markets.
Great. That sounds like a great itinerary recommendation for people that have limited time but are interested in exploring place a little bit beyond the surface of attractions and landmarks. Great. So, are there any actually stories that you can, remember off the top of your head around those places that you just mentioned, or?
Oh yeah, I mean I've been hiking in Hong Kong for since 1993, so I've sometimes got into scrapes. I've been chased away by wild dogs. I've met cobras on the trail, and I had to run away from those. The thing that sticks in my mind, which was actually quite educational for me as well, is that I went hiking. It might have been 1995 during a typhoon, but I had one day off. So I thought I'm going to make the most of it. I'm going to go out on the mountains. I went out into the northeast New Territories, which is quite remote. It takes me a long time to walk there. It was heavy rain, which I don't mind, but I slipped down a hillside into a valley, and because the rain was so heavy, my hiking was very slow, and it started to get dark. And I thought, oh well, I'm not going to get home to Kowloon tonight, but on my map here there's a village, so I'll just knock on a village house door and say to somebody, sorry, I'm stuck here, lost here, can I sleep on your floor, pay you some money or whatever. So I headed to that village, and I was walking through the forest in the dark, in the rain, and I thought, where's the village? I mean, on the map it should be here, right? And I looked around me and I saw the ruins of houses, and this was the village. It was in ruins. Nobody had lived there for 30 years.
Oh no.
Yeah, but it was still on the map, right? And in these days you didn't have phones or anything, so I was just going on a paper map. So I had to sleep in this ruined village in the rain all night, which is fine, isn't it? It's just rain and it wasn't cold. It's Hong Kong. This was in the summer typhoon season. But as I was looking for a place, looking for shelter, just to sit under, the roof of a village temple or something, I suddenly saw a giant spider on the wall, the size of my hand. I'd never seen before, and then another one, and this village was just infested by hand-sized giant spiders. I don't particularly like spiders, and I especially don't want to spend the night in a ruined village full of them, but I had to. So I was so jumpy about these giant spiders crawling on me in the night that I didn't sleep. I just sat on the wall of this temple watching the rain pour into the forest until the sun came up, and then when the sun came up, I thought, okay, now it's time to walk back the way I came, but I couldn't because the rain had come down to such an extent. The valley was now swampy. The hillside was slippery. I couldn't get back up the hill. And I was supposed to be at work, right, this morning. I was late for work. So I ended up pulling myself up the hillside on trees and coming down into another valley, which was also abandoned. There was another ruined village there. And then around the coast to another valley with another ruined village. I thought, isn't this strange? Because these places are beautiful valleys, with beaches and seas. You can be fishermen here or you can be farmers or whatever. No road to them, obviously. I then ended up walking around the coast until I found a village which had people living in it, and then there was a phone box. So, great, a phone box. I had a coin on me, so I called my boss in the restaurant where I worked and said, I'm so sorry. I'm like, 24 hours late for work or whatever it is. And he said, yeah, you'd better have a very good excuse. And I told him, and he thought it was hilarious. He was laughing, so I kept my job. But it did teach me that in the New Territories, there are these remote places where you can find abandoned villages, and that's fascinating in itself. And I looked into it after this, and I found out that these places were very busy until the 1950s or 1960s. They were full of farmers, fishermen, whatever. But then the economy changed to be Hong Kong's economy changed to be more concentrated on manufacturing. Suddenly there were factories in Kowloon making shoes and plastic toys and whatever, and that was better money. So people migrated from the villages to Kowloon for work, and then even further sometimes they went to Manchester or Melbourne or San Francisco to open Chinese restaurants or whatever. They thought they would come back after making their money, but they didn't. So they locked their village house door and never came back. And now you can go to these villages, they're still there. Usually now the front wooden door has fallen in, then the rain has got into the house, then the wooden rafters start to rot, the roof falls in, then the walls fall in. Then you'll often find that it's just the door left, the stone archway of the door. But before the house collapses, you can often find family photos on the wall, wedding photos, even letters from home in the cabinet. Sentimental things that you think people would take with them when they leave a house, which sort of says to me that they never intended to leave forever. They always intended to come back. But life being what it is, their plans changed. And these places are now just, these villages and houses are just slowly melting into the jungle. It's a sort of a sad thing to see, but also very fascinating.
Fascinating, certainly fascinating. The whole story and your story. I'm glad you got to keep your job.
Thank you.
I must say it sometimes happens to me too, to underestimate the technicality of a trail or how much time you need to get to the next place where you can get some transport. Never to the extent where I had to sleep with spiders.
Right.
But
good for you.
But close to the sun going down and perhaps it being a little bit, worrying. But yeah, great. So let's see. What can you? Well, I imagine you've written so many guidebooks and you've included quite a bit there, but if you had to choose some of your personal favorites, and maybe those have changed over time as well, what would you say?
Well, for me, I go hiking usually on my own, which is a bad idea, right? You should always go hiking with a friend or a group for safety, but I tend to do it for peace and quiet, so I usually look out the window. If it's nice weather, I'll go. And because of that, my favourite hikes are the ones that really take you into the wilderness. So particularly Lantau Island, which is the largest island in Hong Kong, but not very developed. And before the airport was built, it was even less developed. I remember hiking out to Tung Chung, actually, when I first arrived, and it was just a village with fields full of flowers that they were cutting, flower farmers. Now it's a new town, but still the mountainous parts of Lantau, you can walk all day and not see anybody. So I love that hike, which goes on the southwest point of Lantau. You can take a bus that's going up to the Big Buddha, which you've probably been to, or Tai O, and if you get off at the point where the bus starts to go down to Tai O, you can then walk up the hill instead. That takes you over a ridge, and you can walk 3 or 4 hours, and then come down to the southwest point of Lantau at a beach village called Fan Lao, and usually you won't have seen anyone else for 4 hours, which is incredible, isn't it? And you can look back in the other direction, and you can see the city, right? You know there's 7 million people there, but on your walk of 4 hours, you didn't see another soul. And to me, that's a lovely change, which you can enjoy. And there are similar ridges in Kowloon, north of Kowloon, and the New Territories, particularly in the northeast. There's a ridge called Bat Sin Leng, which means the ridge of the 8 immortals. It's 8 peaks in a row. It's actually more than 8. I think it's 10. At least it feels like it when you walk it. Looked at it, I thought there's more than 8 there.
Is that Pat Sin Leng?
It's Bat Sin Leng.
I love it too.
You love it too. Great. Because when you're up there, you can see so much, can't you? You can see all of the new territories around you. You can see into China. You get these tall grasses waving in the wind. It's a very elegant, lovely landscape. And yet you're usually on your own above this teeming city. And I'd also recommend everyone visiting, if they're fit enough, to climb up Lion Rock. It's a bit of a climb, but if you're in a hurry, you can take a taxi up to Shatin Pass, which gets you halfway up there. And if you then climb up Lion Rock, which is just exactly between Kowloon and Shatin, you can then look back at Kowloon and Hong Kong Island across Victoria Harbour, and you get a picture of the whole city in one view, really. You've got Kowloon below you. You can see the railway line coming out of a tunnel below your feet. It goes down to the harbour. Then you've got Hong Kong Island with the mountains making its backdrop. And once you're up there, you can get an idea of what the whole of the city looks like. And then walk down the other side and end up in Kowloon.
No, it's a great one. I did climb Lion Rock. And the Bat Sin Leng, going back, what I really like about, I think that's part of the Wilson Trail.
Yes.
And what I like about this trail is that you started at the very south part of Hong Kong Island and you really end up at the border with Shenzhen.
You do,
there,
yeah.
Right? So
yeah.
you kind of cross from south to kind of northwest.
And you see a big change along the way, don't
you? Yes,
you? You see a city and harbour, and then suddenly you're in the mountains, it's villages, and whoa,
very
where have I gone
remote.
to? Yeah.
I actually love the ending of that part of your serious hiking guide, where you feel very accomplished finishing all these 70 kilometers, but then there is no red carpet saying that. It kind of got stuck in my head because that exactly felt that way. It felt grandiose to me, but it was just a modest village.
Yeah. I mean, it's an achievement.
It was hard to get transport back to the city.
It is.
There was no reception.
Exactly. You start off walking in one of the densest cities in the world, and you end up in an abandoned village in the middle of nowhere. That's a big change, and yet it is a big achievement to complete that whole walk. But yeah, there's no one waiting for you to congratulate you. You've just got to find a bus and get back to the city.
Yeah, it was quite hard to find transport back, actually. So that's on the nature part. How about any favorites in the city, actually, itself?
I would say probably if you're looking at the old Hong Kong, a district like Yau Ma Tei in the middle of Kowloon, because you've got old buildings like cinemas, which show you how people used to live. Before television, everyone went to the cinema a few times a week. You've got old street markets. You've got the old fruit market, which is still in operation. It was built in the 1920s. You can see where that all used to get landed there on the coast and then sent out to Hong Kong restaurants and shops. You can look at the old temple there in the middle of Yau Ma Tei, which is to the goddess Tin Hao, the goddess of fishermen. So when that was built, that was obviously right on the coast. But now, you couldn't hit the sea if you threw a stone. The sea is half a mile away. That shows you how Hong Kong has changed. And Yau Ma Tei is an interesting place also for looking at old shops, the old trades, that sort of thing. The markets open up in the evening. You can sit on the street and eat something. It's a nice district for walking around. Sheung Wan is similar. Wan Chai. These old parts of the city are always quite interesting.
Pete, this has been truly fascinating. I could sit here for many more hours listening to your stories, but I'm conscious we only have half an hour here. So thanks so much for coming on the show. But before we go, can I just ask, for those who would like to find out more about you or your books, where can they go and find out more? Yeah,
thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure. What I do, I put some hikes up online every now and then on my website, which is petespurrier.com. So if you go there are some routes that you can follow. And I really hope you do. I hope anyone reading these hikes or listening to this podcast will get the chance to come to Hong Kong and see some of the unexpected parts of it.
Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Pete.